All right, dietary emulsifiers and IBD. Have you had questions about this? So let's dive into like some of the current research just come out and kind of what we think about it all. Let's start with emulsifiers. What are they?
Emulsifiers. It's simply a substance that binds two other substances together. They can be both chemically bound or naturally bound. So when you think of like a salad dressing, there
Mhm.
are emulsifiers in a salad dressing, whether it's homemade or not, and it binds the water and oil together. Quite often for salad dressings, homemade versions, that's either like an egg um, or
There could be something like xanthan gum, which, oh, yeah. So when you think about oil and vinegar, like they don't mix together,
that's
they,
right.
they form like the layer.
Yeah.
So if we were to look at emulsifiers kind of help to bind. So, like, instead of having oil and vinegar, they actually mix together. So they help to emulsify.
Yes. So other natural emulsifiers, other than eggs, are mustard and honey. And like you said, a gum like xanthan gum can bind oil and vinegar together.
Yeah, so there's lots of different emulsifiers that are natural that we consume, and some that are, um, you know, chemically made, and they have varying degrees of impact. There's been a couple studies that have come out of the over the years. One of which said people with IBD have more exposure to these types of emulsifiers, and there's been other studies too that have said not as much as we thought in terms of exposure. But there's three in particular that have come out in several studies as being, they continue to show that they are problematic. So they're carrageenan, carboxymethylcellulose, and polysorbate 80.
Mhm.
So all three have shown some negative impact. They were listed in the IOIBD guidelines as ones we kind of want to stay away from if you have IBD, or to prevent, the downsides of the gut effects of those three. Now, the study that came out in 2025 specifically, it's not fully out yet, but it specifically looked at some of the downsides of consuming large amounts of them, and it specifically looked at the low emulsifier diet compared to um, having regular consumption of emulsifiers within the diet, and it was a double blind, placebo controlled trial. So that means that they're controlling for a lot of the potential things that could impact the results. And so they're looking at comparing these two different diets. And what they found in this study was that those that were on the low emulsifier diet were twice as likely to experience CDAI remission and lower fecal calprotectin. In fact, like a 50% lower fecal calprotectin at the end of 8 weeks. And as a reminder, CDAI score, if you're not familiar with it, that's a score that has been verified to look at how someone's doing with their Crohn's disease specifically. So, looking at the severity, and it's a way of tracking all the different facets that are Crohn's. So, it looks at things like hematocrit, it looks at things like extraintestinal manifestations like erythema nodosum, eye inflammation, some of the stuff that we get outside of the bowel. So it gives a numerical score to how that person's doing. So they not only did they see a lower CDI score, but they also saw a significant reduction in fecal calprotectin over the course of 8 weeks. So, and the thing about this that you and I were talking about, Danielle, is that these are actually pretty easy things to do. So if you do spot any of those three in a product, it's easy generally to find an alternative that doesn't have that.
Yes, absolutely. Where these top three emulsifiers are found is in a lot of dairy products and certain fermented products. Like polysorbate 80, for example, can be found in pickles. And it's so easy to find another pickle on the shelf without polysorbate 80. Same with dairy products. I mean, in general, a lot of people with IBD are unable to tolerate dairy products, and it is something we do recommend to have less of. But there are other options to choose from. So that is a good like vote of confidence in that it's possible, right? It's a simple switch that you can make and not like overreaching, not like a crazy expense to it either, I wouldn't say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are easy swaps, and we've seen this come up enough for the last couple studies, showing that those three are generally the ones we're most worried about. So I do think it's important to look at it and check and see if you are consuming those and what impact that might have on your overall picture. But in terms of the rest of the emulsifiers, there's a lot of different emulsifiers. And like we said, their impact is varying degree, and some of them are naturally found in foods. So it's one of those things where we don't have to be necessarily concerned about all of them, but definitely the three that we talked about are kind of the ones we know most about so far.
Yeah. So other emulsifiers people might be wondering about are ones like maltodextrin, titanium dioxide, and some of the gums, like xanthan gum. We don't have enough information about these things yet, like we do the other three that we mentioned previously.
Yeah, and I'd also say soy lecithin and monoindiglycerides of fatty acids, your MDGs. Now, yeah, we know less about these, but I would say like with xanthan gum and all of the gums are from the gar gum bean. I'm not as concerned about those. I do think that they can cause bloating in some individuals, but you know, most beans can have that kind of effect. I'm less concerned about that, less concerned about some of the others, but wherever you can find less emulsifiers, less of those added ingredients, generally better, but don't be overly concerned about things like xanthan gum and lecithin is my thought, because those are naturally found in foods that we eat. But yeah, some interesting findings.
It is, yes. And with nutrition, well, in all the sciences, there's always more that we can learn. The interesting thing about it, too, that you and I have talked about is when it comes to certain dietary interventions for people with IBD, specifically in pediatric patients, is that there are instances where doctors may recommend enteral nutrition to help them achieve remission. In these products, there are emulsifiers.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting, right? Because there are positive studies that come out of using drinks that do have these emulsifiers in it. And it's one of those, it feels like a double standard, but there with nutrition, you have to look at it. One, you don't know what the person's diet is beforehand. Two, what does changing the context do to a food, like liquid form versus food may have a different impact. Bowel rest can play a role, not having to work as hard to digest something. So there's all these co-founding things when it comes to those studies that, to consider. And there are so many great products now that don't use emulsifiers that if you want to choose a product without that and get even more benefit potentially, there are so many to choose from now, and we can link some of them in the show notes. We're maybe do a blog on that particular topic, but yeah, there's a lot out there now that just wasn't there before that I think can be helpful.
Absolutely. And I think, bottom line to this, we are gaining more and more evidence around carrageenan, carboxymethylcellulose, and polysorbate 80 being things we want to try our best to avoid for IBD. Who knows, even if in a year from now, we may know even more about emulsifiers, but those are the ones to be mainly aware of. And, if anyone brings up any kind of extremes around emulsifiers, I think we should really question that, because we don't need to scare people with food, but awareness is always a big key.
Yeah. So you can be an empowered consumer and choose for yourself too.
Yes, thank you for rounding that out.
All right, everybody. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope that it helped kind of explain this new hot topic of emulsifiers. And I'm sure there will be more to come when this article fully comes out. We can have another discussion about it.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care.